Okay, ready? Welcome to the Jesus Said Love podcast.
Season 4, and we have some big announcements.
The podcast started as an extension of our work and ministry with survivors of sexual exploitation and trafficking. However, these conversations exposed a broader cultural issue impacting Christ followers.
So starting in Season 4, this podcast will attempt to explore the big question: how do we live and love like Jesus today?
We are moving the podcast under the religion and spirituality category to explore the wide context of Christ following. So please share this show with others.
In this podcast, we will give space for conversation, compassion, and courage as we seek to love God and love our neighbor.
Lastly, we're looking to grow our support as there has been no budget for this podcast. So if you listen to the show, would you consider supporting us even at $5 a month by going to JesusSaidLovePodcast.com.
Supporters will get bonus content and savings on resources like books, products, and conferences, and raw live video footage of the recording.
So how do we live and love like Jesus?
Let's find out. Yes, I have the power.
You have the power. Now I have a other mic I can use if this isn't.
Oh,
as
you sound
good.
great. Oh,
Okay,
you sound
great.
great.
Good.
You look like a customer service representative.
That's right. That's right. I like to say a helicopter pilot.
Okay, we can go with that.
Yep, that's my dream. I'm like, I'll say a couple Rogers and
That's awesome.
So you got to throw in a niner.
Niner. I feel like you have to have some sort of Southern accent or something to be a helicopter pilot. I don't know.
I love that
You're
it's
kind of
helicopter.
halfway there
I,
with pilot.
I
Pilot.
actually
Wait,
follow
so
a couple
pilot.
of helicopter pilots on the TikTok, and it's awesome. You know,
I mean, I don't feel like I have a imagination that I'd be a really good pilot, but I think in the clutch moments I would just freak out.
I don't know. This story in here, Cathy, with you remaining very calm on the ship.
That's not me. That's my dad. Oh, that's right. I was there. That's true.
You said you only had a twinge of fear. I think you used that word, twinge.
I did. Yes, I was
or
not
tinge.
afraid. Yes, I loved it. I was like, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love it. I love it.
okay. Have you already briefed her on everything? And
No, you jumped on right after we jumped on. So we haven't.
babe, you look good today.
I
You
know.
do.
I got like dressed.
I like
It's
your
really
hair.
exciting. I told Cathy that had she been here last week, she would have, it's just a new world every day.
I know. Did you
We do
see
what we
the
can.
thing with Carrie yesterday?
I didn't watch it, but she's a mess. I love her.
Dude, well, I'll tell you. So we scheduled this IGTV live, and I was like, okay, I think I can make it. I'm coming straight back from horseback riding, and I got lost trying to find a gas station. I walked in my door, and 2 minutes later, I was live with her. And she's like knows
She's
how to
very
do her makeup.
polished. Yeah.
So polished, and I was like, I'm like glossy up top. I'm like watching myself on video, pull it together, just talk about the gospel, and you're gonna be okay.
It is the everlasting crutch we can lean on. It is.
Yeah.
In a good way. Carrie's great, babe. Carrie Scott Garcia, who we had on the podcast a couple of weeks ago that I didn't know.
Short blonde hair
As-
with cool glasses.
Yep.
Yes.
She
And
was
I
a
did-
trip.
Isn't she?
And I didn't know she was Allender certified.
Mhm.
Oh, she
I
is.
didn't cert 1, I think.
Two.
But-
Yep.
Oh, she's 2. Okay.
Mhm.
This is becoming quite the cult.
I know.
I
Like
love
the
it.
web.
Everyone
web.
becoming.
All of my favorite professionals somehow touch the Allender Center that I've met along the way. And it's really exciting to be in Waco. And
Okay,
there's
save
not
all
many-
that. Just
Okay.
save
Okay. We're gonna
that.
save it. We're gonna.
I
Listen,
thought we were
we're gonna-
recording.
We are, but this is for the pre-thing. Did she tell you we're married?
No,
Okay, so we're married, which is why I called her babe
Oh,
and said
that's
you look
good.
good.
I mean, I figured, but I didn't know Texas.
well,
I
some
don't know.
people we didn't realize people didn't
So
realize that.
sorry.
And so we're like, I think at one point I made a serious verbal pass at her, and the guest was
You
like,
look beautiful.
"It's okay, we sleep together. It's good. We're safe."
Yes. Yes, we do.
Is there anything off limits for you?
No.
Okay. 4-letter words are allowed if they're appropriately placed
Got it.
in a witty, genius way.
No pressure.
What else, babe?
Oh, I don't know. I think she's a pro at this. So I think, yeah, that's all I got. So bringing us here into what we're going to talk about. I'm so excited to meet you and to have you on. Some of our history with the Allender Center is it changed my life. I think I was, first of all, given one of Dan's books in college when I was encountering, was away from home and starting to name sexual abuse as part of my childhood. So someone threw the wounded heart at me and was like, you should read this. And like 2 pages in, I was like, F this, like done. I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Wasn't ready like at all. So anyway, it took years. And then you were just at Grand Parkway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think I told you this, Neil married us and
Yes.
Marcy mentored me through college. And so they used Intimate Allies as our kind of premarital book, which really set us on a very different trajectory in Southern evangelical land,
Right.
which is more hierarchical and complementarianism and all of that. And that book laid a foundation for us that we're like, we want to co-labor, we want to co-partner in the kingdom together. And so fast forward, start working with women in the sex industry. And probably 5 years ago, I ended up at ICAP at a To Be Told workshop.
Okay.
And Lori Proctor was my guide.
Oh, yes.
And so and then Brett went through a workshop in Houston. And then what else? Lori's come down here. And then I invited Heather Stringer in to do a ritual for me last year.
Oh, good.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so you guys are just special to me. And
Have we already started?
What do you mean?
Have we started the podcast?
No, I'm just giving her up to speed
Okay.
of where we're at so that we can dive into the content.
Okay.
So anyway, that's how I know. That's why your book has been so important to us. So the group that was there to witness the ritual last year for me is the book club that's reading Redeeming Heartache together.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of.
Have you done one of those rituals?
Have I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Heather and I are good friends.
She talks about it in the book.
That's right.
That's right. I remember seeing that. The very first time that you did one, were you kind of like, well, this is gonna be weird?
Oh, for sure. I hate everything about it and I love it all at the same time.
Kind of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody goes, we're going to do this ritual. I'm like, we bring in a witch. Like, what is happening here?
I know she's kind of like Stevie Nicks, isn't she? She's
kind of
witchy.
Mm-hmm. She is.
I know. Yeah.
I love it.
I actually interviewed her to get into the grad school. I was her admissions. Isn't that funny?
That's amazing.
I know.
So interesting. I talked to her about applying for the arts and theology program.
Yeah.
So I was really interested. I did some inquiry on that. I don't know. I'm still questioning this path. So, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. Are you ready to start the podcast, Brett?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So do you want to start it like we normally, we usually do like a little intro,
and
then we'll introduce you in, and then we'll just dive into the content.
Sounds good.
Sup, playa?
Oh, that's my intro. Hey.
What you doing?
Okay. All right.
What you doing on the other end of this mic?
Well, I'm excited to be here.
What is
I am hosting a podcast.
What is the most exciting thing you've done today so far prior to this podcast recording?
Well, 100% yoga. So that was my exciting morning. It was so good. It was great.
What made it so good?
It
And
was a
2
hot
words.
stretch and release.
That's
about
3
3?
words.
Hot stretch and release. Those are the 3 I'm giving you. Love it or like it. You can take one out and leave the 2 that you want.
A hot
But
release.
those are my 3 words. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
great.
good for you. Well, I'm glad to see you.
No, I'm glad to see you two here.
And I'm really excited about this here episode today.
Yeah. You seem kind of amped right now.
Oh, you don't even know.
Yeah. I can just feel it.
A lot of energy coming, guys. Just get ready.
Oh, I know.
It's all good. It's all good. But this has been a full morning.
Okay. Well, I feel you. I've been on those little conversation text and slacks that you've been on. So I know we're coming in with a lot.
Coming in hot.
I'm excited to introduce our podcast guest because we are diving into the book that she co-authored, and it is super exciting. I'm going to hold up the book. Our listeners can't listen to this and see it, but this is Redeeming Heartache by
Why is yours
Dan.
backwards and mine not?
Well, I don't know.
Sorry.
I don't know.
Why is mine backwards and yours not?
Well,
That's
mine looks
weird.
backwards and yours look straight to me.
Well, for those who are able to watch, you're going to see both what it looks like in the right way and in the wrong way.
This is Redeeming Heartache. And on the podcast, this is not Dan Allender. You're going to hear the voice of Cathy Loerzel. And welcome to the Jesus Said Love Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you coming into this podcast?
Oh man, I don't even know. So my dog, I have a huge 110-pound English golden retriever who's technically fat. I just like to think that he's like just cute and thick, but he's super anxious and he mirrors me a lot. And so I'm like, okay, how we doing, Cooper?
Yeah. How am I?
How am I?
How am I?
You're real anxious. He's like right by my side all the time, and he's huge and he wants to sit on my lap. So I think, I've gotten back from being on the road, and anytime I transition between that world out there and then coming back into my home, it just takes a little bit to recenter. So I'm really glad to be here, but I'm still asking myself, how am I?
Wow. Transitions are just hard. Transitions take so much courage too. Yeah.
Well, especially from the road.
Reacclimating from the road.
It's like the road is not real world, but it is, but it isn't.
No. And especially in COVID. So I don't know, Texas is so different, but Seattle, we're still pretty shut down. So I haven't been to an office in 2 years.
Okay.
And I used to work in an office, 5 to 7 days a week because of doing conferences. And so Texas, I was sitting in a worship service for the first time, and it was packed. Every single seat was taken, and we're like singing. And it was the first time in 2 years that I'd been in a worship service.
Was it weird, or did it feel at home?
It was really weird. And I had to
because you're breathing on me.
No, I mean, I was anxious. I was really anxious. So I sat there. I mean, I looked like a freak. I was like, I hope no one knows who I am. But turns out my face was on the bathroom stall doors. So every time anyone went to the bathroom, they saw my face. So everyone knew who I was. And here I am in their service, like tapping.
Amazing.
Doing this.
It was really weird. I mean, so good. But I was like, I am in a different world.
Right.
The old Texas super spreader at your service.
Woo. Yeah. It's like, I mean, I've already had COVID. My whole family's had COVID. I'm like triple vaxxed. I'm like, I don't even know anymore. Put me in the church service. Let's do this.
Right. I know. Well, I hope Texas treated you well. Yes. I hope that you had some good Texas hospitality.
Oh,
and
it was
warmth.
So fun.
Did they take you to eat at that little Italian restaurant down the road from the church?
No, we went to a Mexican restaurant.
Oh, good. You got to have good Mexican food.
Totally.
Yeah, we had these fajitas that came in this like with coals underneath it, keeping it warm. I was like, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
right. I'm here for.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
I love it. Well, okay. So just to let you know, in preparation for this podcast, usually I create a lot of the questions and direction of where we're going. But I have to say, because we are doing Redeeming Heartache as a book club, it's actually not just Brett and I interviewing you right now. I come with 4 other people behind me.
Yes.
Three couples, 6 people total. And we have just been really fascinated by the work that you've done, because just give everyone kind of a idea of who you are and then what this book is all about.
Sure. My original background is in business, and but I found myself at the grad school kind of on accident, the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, and decided to get my master's in psychology. And, again, kind of on accident, wasn't really intending to become a therapist. And indeed, I don't actually see one-on-one clients. So I never really became a quote unquote therapist. But I kept finding in the worlds that I was a part of this disconnect between the Jesus that felt so real in scripture and God, and then this world that I was attached to in the church that was so cloistered and not wanting to talk about what was real and what was really going on in people's hearts and the kind of shadow, dark sides of their stories. And I started to find freedom in that in college, actually through Sacred Romance by John Eldredge.
Yeah.
I started reading that and was like, this seems true to me. And so I started to run small groups out of my dorm room.
Oh my gosh. That's
Yes.
amazing.
I know.
On your own volition.
Yes.
You're like, I got this, guys.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
we're going to dive in to the deep waters.
I've read the book. I've mastered the content.
Yeah.
Now let me help you.
Yes.
I get it.
I don't have to learn stuff very long before I'm like, oh, I can teach this. But more than anything, I really believe that we're meant to create the thing we most desire in the world. And I've really lived by that. And so I'm like, well, if I want this sort of small group to happen, I'll run it. I mean, there's a degree of arrogance in that. There's also a degree of courage that both are counterbalanced. But so I started running these groups, and all of a sudden, all of these college girls were telling me their stories and their sexual abuse stories and things about eating disorders and depression and anxiety and all these deep places. And we started to lean into it. And then from there, I was like, God, I want to be in ministry. But I was told because I was a woman, I couldn't lead. That was my background. And I was like,
what background are you from?
It was like an evangelical fundamental church, kind of Bible based, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And so they were conservative, and they were like, hey, you can lead women, you can lead kids, but we need you to kind of take a back seat. And so, and I wanted to be faithful. And so I kind of felt so bound and not sure how to use my gifting. So I did it whatever way I could, any group that would meet with me, I was like, let's meet. Then I started working with high school kids and doing the same thing. And that was problematic for their parents because I was bringing up all this stuff and talking about things that no one else was talking about. And in all of that, I graduated and went into corporate, and I liked that world. It was interesting to me. But my friend Abby Wong Hefter, who actually was one of the original people in the Allender Center, came to me at one point and said, "Look, you're out of your calling. You're doing this work, but you're also not exactly sure how to move people from like point A to point B. You're exposing all this stuff and working with people and being present with them, but you don't have enough experience. You don't know how to kind of bring them to the next step." And so she said, "I know about this grad school in Seattle. She was living in Seattle at the time, and she was like, come to Seattle and I'm going to set up an interview for you." And I was like, "Well, you're crazy, but I do owe you a visit, so fine." And at the end of it, I ended up, kind of feeling this call of God that was like, you don't need to know what's next, but you do need to quit your job. So I did on the tarmac on the way back from Seattle. I called my boss at IBM and quit.
Wow.
and not knowing what I was going to do next, and really fighting with this grad school because I was like, something about this is compelling, but they were a hot mess.
Mm.
A startup. No one
Mhm.
actually knew how to run the business side of it. So anyways, I ended up going. It was the last thing on the table at the end of this journey, and ended up going to the Seattle school, and then met Dan pretty quickly. And right away, when Dan started speaking, I had this sense of he knows something of the human heart. And when he looks into the heart of those things that we're most afraid of, he doesn't flinch. And he also is offering language and a way to explain a way forward that doesn't just keep you stuck in your trauma.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly compelling to me. And I've been with the school now for 17 years.
Amazing.
In the midst of that, started the Allender Center 10 years ago with Dan, and kind of said, look, what you're teaching is incredible, but you don't have a method to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's create the method behind it. And I thought I was just an interpreter, but as I got into it and started to do story groups myself and started to train, I realized it was actually my material too.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of why we co-authored the book, kind of honoring the fact that he's the one who started it, but we've both together and with the team have really taken it into a place where it can become transferable to lots of different people.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. And to say that my life has been impacted by your work and by the Allender Center would just be an understatement. I mean, anyone who comes in proximity. In fact, I joke that, I've never gone through your CERT program. I've done one story workshop, and I have sent and referred more people your way.
Well, thank you.
Like if we had like a finder's fee, like Emily gets like a percentage of it's crazy.
I'm taking you out to dinner when I come to Waco.
I tell everybody about it because it is so transformational and so good. So this book is kind of a culmination. Like if you've read other Allender books, there's like pieces of kind of, you lay out this foundation of why your story matters a little bit in the front of the book, but then you kind of go into these three archetypes and these three wounds that kind of define the archetypes, which I am just fascinated by archetypes. I just love learning from them. I think there's so many different ways to see yourself and it's just kind of, we're ever evolving, we're ever seeing new angles of who we are in the world. And it's like these layers, we just never quit growing. And it's so exciting that you've offered this. So tell our audience about kind of this book, because the subtitle is How Past Suffering Reveals Our True Calling. My first question is, why didn't you put anything about archetypes on the title?
Because people don't know what archetypes are.
Oh, okay.
I mean, not,
There you go.
again, in our world, we do, right? But
Yeah.
so a big thing with the book is that we wanted it to be as accessible as possible to the widest range of people. And anytime you start to put clinical language, it's also why we didn't use the word trauma. We use the word heartache, because we wanted to really remove any barriers from people thinking, oh, this is beyond me, or this is too psychological. This isn't, Christian, because there's always these dichotomies of like, well, you're either a Christian or you believe in neuroscience. I'm like, or, both.
And maybe people are tired of the word trauma. I just read a report that trauma is now like one of the most widely used words that we're so familiar with. But when we started learning about it, over a decade ago, it was like nobody was talking about trauma. But now it's all like, oh, trauma. It's kind of become trivialized in a way.
It has. Yeah.
So I love that you used heartache. It's
right.
beautiful.
Yeah, because I think that's the trick, right? Because people can dismiss the word trauma, one, because it's being overused, but two, because it's like, well, I don't really have traditional trauma in my life. And so, where we start the premise of the book is that sense of none of us have escaped harm. Nobody, because we live on the earth and we're meant for Eden. We're meant for perfect connection with God, self, others, and the earth. That's what we're created for. And then we kind of get flung into this world where people are doing their best, but there's a difference, obviously, between what we're meant for and what we're experiencing. And then that question of what do we do with the gap?
Mhm.
What do we do to make up the difference or to stay safe? And what we do in those moments where we realize what we're meant for and a subconscious level is not what we're going to experience here on earth, we protect.
Yeah.
And we create ways of being that again are brilliant. Thank God we can protect ourselves, and we're not left always vulnerable. But the problem is then when you get into your adulthood, the way you protected yourself as a child from the world that you were living in impacts your capacity to love, to be loved, to be able to be settled, to handle difficult experiences, and to really connect to God and have like an inner joy and peace, and love and creativity that we're all meant for. And so the hope of the book is that we help you understand both where trauma first came into your life, where heartache came in, what we've done with that, how we've self-protected, how that's turned into styles of relating that impact your current way of being in the world. And then how do you heal and actually move into more of who you're meant to be? And I think oftentimes when we talk about trauma, the best we do is like, survive or manage it. There isn't a lot of imagination for what flourishing looks like in the face of it. And there are some roadmaps, but it's like, do love yourself better or take a salt bath. And I'm like, I mean, those are great things, but it doesn't actually solve the problem.
Right.
Or compare it.
Yes.
Right. You say in the very beginning of the book that sets kind of the premise is what you've just said in some ways, that no one, of course, can escape trauma, but we can decide who we will become as we sort through the aftermath. And so I think that's the reimagining of, we get so stuck in the story or in how we see the story or in what people have told us happened to us, and people have defined who we are for us. And I think what you're inviting us into is to imagine who we want to become and who God desires for us to become. And it's so exciting. So how did you decide on the 3 wounds? So how do you want to talk about this? I'm just wondering, Brett, how do you want to talk about it? Do you want her to go through the 3 wounds and then or do you want to go like wounds?
So let me say it this way. Let me say it this way. Number 1, we listened to the podcast a long time ago when you guys were just starting to put the idea of this content out. So now to read kind of where it has morphed into has been really fascinating. So the way that you lay the book out is there's a wound and then there is
transformational kind of the
right.
2 archetypes.
So for every wound, there's a mirror archetype.
Redeemed.
A redeemed.
There we go. There's the word.
Redeemed archetype.
It's been a long day.
Already.
So one of our class members, he's like, I don't like the way it's laid out.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, well, you didn't write the book, so you don't get to determine how the thing's laid out. But I did find his question interesting. He wanted to read the 3 wounds first and then read the redemption. Whereas I found reading the wound and the redemption together a little bit more interesting. So why did you decide to write it where you put the wound and the redeemed piece together versus all the bad and then all the good?
Yeah, that's so we went back and forth on that a lot with our editor, and because originally they wanted to put the 3 core wounds and then how those things are healed,
which is I think how the podcast went.
I think so. Yeah, but when I teach this in certificate 1, I always go through the okay, so what are we meant for? We're meant for, so this is all based off of the idea of faith, hope, and love. So faith is what we're meant for, right? When faith is broken through betrayal, we become orphans, right? When then we move back into redemption, we move into priest. And I love that because I think when you talk about orphan and priest, back to back, you actually gain more of an imagination of the true core wound of orphan, because you start to understand what redemption looks like.
Yes.
And I think we're meant to couple those, because there's so often, I don't know that you would really remember the particularity of orphan when you would all of a sudden read 5 chapters later about priest. Like, I love the fact that they're together, because you actually start to heal that orphan wound as it's exposed. Like, when you read that chapter, that's one of my favorite chapters that I wrote, was the orphan and the priest. Because I have a lot of orphan wounds, and my priest is pretty low functioning. And so to try to explain the need for priest, my orphan was soothed and attuned to, and like there was an imagination for, oh, that's what my orphan needs is care and ritual and imagination, and someone helping me tell the story, right? So I think that's what we wanted to do with the book, was actually tend to those nerve endings as they're being exposed, versus expose all the nerve endings and then try to bring a balm to it.
Yeah, because some of us might not even make it through the end of the book.
Right.
I mean, that's really how particular and intricate you expose in the book, even in the writing and with the certain stories that you share. I don't know that it would take us a lot longer to process that if it was like orphan, stranger, and widow all back to back. It'd be like, oh, I don't know what I am. I don't know if this is me. It's all of it, and it is all of it. So that's another thought, is that let's just go ahead and quickly describe each of these. If you want to, Brett, just like the book does, let's take the orphan and the priest, and let's go into what does an orphan wound look like? And then what does the redemption of that orphan wound look like in the priest?
Yeah. So, really the core wound of an orphan is somewhere along the way, probably pretty quickly, they learn that no one is coming. They are on their own. And whether or not that's emotionally, that's actually physical neglect. We are born needing attunement and connection with our caregivers right away. Our first instinct, right, as soon as we get out of the womb, is for most babies, it's to cry. Our instinct is, I can feel all my feelings, and someone will be there to soothe me, to comfort me, to clothe me, to take care of these needs, right? But there's fascinating research around orphanages and places where babies are left and are not attended to. Very quickly they stop crying.
Right.
And so we attune very quickly to how much our caregivers are able to care for us, what's available to us, and we adjust. And so a baby who is well cared for will continue to cry when they're hungry, when they're cold, because their expectation is that someone is coming. An orphan wound is that sense that I cried and no one's there. And so I'm going to go, I'm going to reduce my need, and I'm going to learn to tend to myself.
Do orphans do you think, as we talk about these, I'm just wondering, is there a primary wound for each of us that helps us identify with this most, with one, orphan, stranger, or widow the most? Like, would you say that there's kind of a primary wounding that, if we can get to that, reveals kind of what our basic need is?
I think so. For me, orphan is a lot. So when I wrote the orphan chapter, it was like, oh gosh, let's figure out which story to use, not if I have stories, right?
Right.
But there's a reason why Dan wrote the stranger section, the
Mhm.
stranger and prophet, and I wrote the orphan and priest, right?
Yeah.
Because my wounds are much more on that. And it's also how I relate to the world. So I'm going to be a pull up your bootstraps, figure out how to just do it all and get it done. And it's actually harder for me to open myself up to the vulnerability of needing other people
Mhm.
because I'm actually more comfortable doing it myself. I can then also have contempt for all the people who didn't actually show up for me and feel really good about it.
Oh yeah, Enneagram. He's holding up 8 fingers. Are you an
Oh.
Enneagram 8?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I am the
Oh, you're a
beloved
3?
3.
Okay.
Damn it.
But let me tell you, when I take the test, I am like 3 and 8. So I don't even
Mhm.
know how
Mhm.
that works.
Laurie writes a little bit about in the back of the book about
Yes.
overlaying. And I do think that's why these, whether it's Myers-Briggs or Strengths Finders or any of the myriad of skill disc, I
Mhm.
mean, you can lay over all of these kind of different
Absolutely.
tools to kind
And-
of help you name your story.
Mhm.
And we're all of it. I get that. But like,
Yes.
just even hearing you just, so I have resolved when I read orphan, I'm like, oh, I'm an orphan. Yeah, I get it. I got stories. Then we got to the stranger. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so the stranger. Like, that's like, I've got more stories as stranger.
Right.
So I guess my question is it most helpful to land on one in order to move through the most healing,
Mhm.
or is it to just identify, acknowledge, and accept in each space? Does it make sense? In
Mhm.
each archetype of what you are.
Yeah. So when we have people go through their stories, right? You know, the hope of this book is that it will just spark connections. And so they'll start to read their own story into these archetypes to give them just some handholds to help them get up this mountain of healing, you know, and however you can use it is fantastic. I always go for which story feels the most at the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so when you're reading the book and you're looking at orphan, then you're looking at your stranger and you're looking at your widow, which story keeps on coming up for you that feels haunting? Because what I often find is that people do this work, like the thing you're meant to do first is the thing that's on the surface. And then as you deal with that, more then opens up underneath you and underneath that. So I'm still doing this work, and I've been doing this work
Right.
for, 17 years. And that's you. And if you don't count the work that I was doing in college, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's still stories. I mean, I was just over Christmas, our whole family got COVID. I had already gotten COVID in the fall. So I was the only person in the family who was healthy. Thank God, one of us was. So my 2 boys had, one of them had pretty severe case, and then my husband was sick as a dog. It also snowed, which doesn't do in Seattle, and it dropped to like, negative 17 degrees or something ridiculous in Seattle. So our pipes froze, our chickens were dying. Like, I mean, everyone is, and I am the only person left to handle it. And I'm like, all right,
Boss up.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, I won't necessarily go into detail, but it was a little scary because
Right.
I was like, okay, I am made for this. Let's do it. I mean, I'm like literally holding up warm water to the chickens in their coop, like nursing them back to health. I'm changing pipes, and I'm like, we're gonna do this, like, and I'm gonna be awesome at it. And not only am I gonna do it great, but it's gonna be better than what I normally do. So I'm like keeping the house extra clean. I mean, it is neurotic what happened to me.
Right.
I mean, I'm watching myself and going, okay, I know that I've had more healing than this. What is going on? But it was also one of those moments where those categories were so helpful for me, even now.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden I was like, why do I feel so calm?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You were tapping into something so primal.
So primal. And
like
again,
so
it's like
hardwired.
So grateful that it's there, right?
Yeah.
Because we needed to keep things alive, literally. And it was tapping into the sense of, I actually felt calmer when I knew it was just up to me. when I knew that there was no one coming. I couldn't even get groceries delivered. I was like bringing a sled to the grocery store, with like and I mean, it was bananas. And I was like, okay, so my orphan is alive and well, and she's like happy as a clam because she all of a sudden is very clear about her job right now, and she can do it. And she's like, perfect. My widow was like looking at my husband, laying in bed being like, I'm gonna, you're gonna get the best care. Right. I mean, it was the ultimate FU to him, which is so dark and awful,
Yeah.
but it's true, because I was like, I had COVID before and you didn't do this good of a job when you were taking care of the house. Like, I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
And when he did reemerge, my widow, which, we'll get into in a second, but what the widow does is isolates and says, look, it's too dangerous to actually be vulnerable. Yeah. And so she just kind of, and she's an ice queen. Like my widow is so icy. And so my poor husband like crawls back to health, and all of a sudden he meets this woman who's like, I don't actually need you. I was better off without you. Right. Like, look how clear right. And he's like, okay, girl, like,
wow.
And he's he knows all the stuff. So he's like, your orphan and widow are a real pill right now. So let's figure out how to tend to those things. Right. But what happened was that even in the midst of those things that were coming up, I had enough self-awareness to go, oh, I'm really scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really alone. I feel very vulnerable. And my protection is to elevate all of these places that I needed and learned when I was young to protect me in this moment. And in that moment, like, it wouldn't have been helpful for me to have contempt for the orphan or the widow. But what was helpful was to recognize I am in kind of a dark spot based on a lot of core wounds, and I need to be really kind, really gentle. And thank God I have a husband who knows those parts of me, who could also kind of come back in gingerly and be like, hey, you're not alone. I know you had to be, and that was scary, and you're revved up, but like, take some space. Let's take it down a notch. Like, what do you need? But again, all of that is so much more helpful when you actually know what you're dealing with. All of that could just be seen as normal for anyone who hasn't done any work. And then they're in conflict with their husband for the next 2 months and at war with their own hearts.
Yes. Oh,
God, that's so good.
And so some of the primary hallmarks, and we're going to move on and move pretty quickly, but the hallmarks of the orphan are the orphan's control, hypervigilance, and the shame.
Yep.
And so I think those were really helpful as far as handles around, do I have these traits? Do I have these behaviors that I'm kind of living into this orphaned identity? So what does the orphan in a redeemed way, if an orphan can heal, what does it take for him or her to heal that wound? And let's just also say right from the front, these are not linear steps.
Right. That's right.
Okay. So just want to say that if you're listening, because it's a circle, and I even think you noted it on the book, these kind of intersectional, is that what that is? We wondered in the book group. Okay. Yeah. These beautiful intersections.
It's called a mandala.
I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a very feminine energy, right? It's not, like you said, it's not linear. And so many people want to make it like step 1, step 2, step 3.
Right.
And it just doesn't work that way. So even for me, in that moment over Christmas, I'm still doing the work.
Yeah.
But so the redeemed orphan, the orphan really needs attunement. And what attunement is the capacity for someone else or parts of yourself to recognize need and vulnerability and the fact that you actually have, like, you need other people to see your face, to read your story. And an orphan is in so much trauma or denial of their story because it's
painful.
Right.
100%.
So an orphan's like, super sorry, not going to talk about it because I gotta get some stuff done here.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, that's where the control and the hypervigilance comes in. But they're also not able to rest because rest comes when you feel safe.
Yep.
And an orphan never feels safe. And so what attunement brings is a degree of safety and a sense of rest. Like someone sees me and I can let my guard down. And trust that there can be care for me. There can be goodness for me. So the priest is the archetype that offers that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for me, I've needed lots of priests in my life, like we were talking about Heather Stringer and different people, Rachel Clinton Chen, people who have that high priest category that can come back and read your own story back to you. And say, this is who you are, right? Like I write about this in the book. There's a moment where I'm kind of undone and functioning out of all of my orphan, widow, stranger places. And Rachel comes into my office and says, hey, like you're not okay. And this is not who you are. Let me remind you of who you are. And you need your story brought back to you. Well, for an orphan, their control mechanism is to keep their space and fragment their story. You only kind of pick pieces, right? Because the whole is too overwhelming.
It's too hard.
A priest can bring the whole of your story and defragment with you. And that's external. So that's like other relationships that are more priestly. But that's also what our inside parts need. So my orphan not only needs other relationships that are priestly, it also needs my internal priest to start to rise up and help me remember who I am and help me go back into these stories and have enough courage to say, like, you need to defragment and you also need to be able to rest.
I want to just speak to places and spaces that can offer that priestly gift without they're not even called, priestly places. But I think for a lot of people who grew up in an alcoholic home, the space and care that you get at Al-Anon for adults, children of alcoholics and drug users, or AA itself, in its own structure, it's almost like this collective priest.
Yep.
Because you're going around naming stories and then you are asked to share yours each week. Kind of little by little, it becomes this hour of care and attunement where no one's fixing you, no one's controlling you. You just kind of can take a deep breath and like settle down. It's been one of the most beautiful places in my life that when I think about my orphan places, before I even stepped into doing story work, it was, the reason I'm able to go into this deep dive with story work is because I've been attuned to for 2 years before, it just helped me let my guard down a little bit.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
I love the priest and what you talk about, and just remembering, inviting those rituals, which is what care groups often use, are rituals to go through that hour or that process. And then a priest reorienting the heart. You also talk about a reorientation of the heart. What does that mean? And what does that look like? What does a priest do to reorient?
I think that's, what Rachel did with me in my office was a sense of mirroring me back to myself and saying, look, where the current trajectory that you're on is not actually the best part of you, the trajectory that you're meant to be on. So how do we turn back or turn towards, like, I think reorientation is a lot like what I think biblical repentance looks like. Because it's not just, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person, I want forgiveness. It's a sense of I'm turning in the wrong direction. My heart needs to turn back towards who I truly am, who God is, who the people in my life are, and be able to kind of move back into alignment. And I think that's what reorientation does. And the priest brings us that through reminding us of our stories, because when we see our stories in fragmented ways, it's very difficult for us to understand what really happened to us. So there's disintegration, right? But when we start to see the fullness of the story, we start to understand why we do what we do, why we feel what we feel. You know, our bodies carry the truth of our story all the time, but our brain has separated what the body knows from what we've made meaning or making out of in our brains, right? So this is your left and right hemisphere. And so part of the work is bringing those things back in, you know, so many people who have stories that they have fragmented from, or are disoriented in, actually their bodies know. So you find a lot of people with anxiety, with gut issues, with autoimmune disorders. Like there's all of this science and data that shows your body actually knows what's true. So our work is then being able to reconnect those things so that we can actually rest and be back in alignment.
So good. Oh my gosh. I could ask just a million questions. Brett, do you have anything before we move on? Because I want to.
Yeah, I know. I'm just sitting here going, this is going to take forever. This is not.
It's a two-part.
This is going to be a three-parter.
Oh my gosh.
No, I love
There's
what you
just so
say.
much content.
I love what you say here when you say attunement slows an orphan down and invites him to open his heart to the possibility that one who knows him well may not betray him.
Yeah.
And that I just think that's huge. You know, as an 8, that's a big deal for me, is betrayal. I actually had a meeting earlier today with a potential board member, and he asked me what my biggest fear was, and I said, y'all taking over.
Yeah. Right.
My biggest fear is a coup. Because this is our life's work and you could take that from us. That's giving you a lot of power. But I need to give you that power.
Yeah. And I think the hard part is that just because we're healed in these areas doesn't necessarily mean that those things don't happen. Right. And so I think that's the part of, like, you know, there are plenty of people that I've trusted in my life that I was like, there won't be betrayal here. And I've allowed my heart to rest. And then there was. So then I think part of the hope is that healing and understanding our orphan gives us more capacity in those moments to not turn on ourselves, to not necessarily turn on God, to figure out how to heal and recover from those things more quickly, or without causing more damage. Right.
Oh, so good. Because if we are hyper vigilant, if we're functioning out of our wound, then, and even if we don't know it, it's always this setup between I'm the victim and you're the offender. And we just keep living into that. And then if we're always the victim, then we go into self-sabotaging behaviors because we're trying to like soothe. And so it's just a beautiful invitation to see really clearly, you know, this book is just a tiptoe in the shallow water. It really, I mean, it's, for some who might read it, it may feel like you've been plunged into the deep end though.
Yes.
You know, like some people are going to read this and feel like, whoa, this is the deepest work I've ever done.
I will say
really
this.
Is a start.
I will say this, as I have read this, I've had so many things become so clear, just like in my own work. But I think it is a good, manageable, palatable amount of information to make you go, oh, that's why I do that.
Yeah.
You know, I am one grandiose son of a bitch sometimes. And it's not because I'm trying to show out.
Right.
It's, I don't feel comfortable here.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, who would have ever connected those dots? You know,
right. Yeah,
not me.
Right. Well, and that control actually soothes you.
Yeah.
So moving into stranger and the
Mhm.
disruption of environments, talk a little bit about this archetype.
Yeah. So the stranger is a lot of fun. The stranger is the part of ourselves and the person who feels and sees everything that is true about the world. And so the stranger sees where there's injustice, where your family is off. Like the stranger is the one who, when your parents are fighting in the car and you're watching all of this happen, and then they're like, okay, we're on our way to church. And when we get to church, everyone pull together and we're going to all get out and we're going to smile. And then dad's going to go and shake hands because he's a deacon, and mom's going to go lead worship. Even though there was just like almost the equivalent of domestic violence within the car 10 minutes prior. The stranger is the one who's like, no,
I'm not doing it.
Not doing it.
Not playing the game.
And they expose, they rebel, they're pissed, but they're actually heartbroken because they see what should be. Yeah. So they're the ones who are the dreamers, the ones who understand the radical imagination of the gospel, and are furious that we haven't been able to do anything about it. So they've been rendered powerless to change their families, to change the structures. And so they go to dark places quickly because they're actually the empaths. They're the ones who feel it all, but then don't have a way to actually impact the world. And so, they'll rebel, but often when you're in a family and you realize, how come I'm the only one who sees this? How come I'm the only one who's speaking out about this, or who isn't willing to play the game on Christmas, to make sure that everyone's happy and feeling like we have a great family? Well, they get kicked out. They get shamed. They get told, like, you're so dramatic. Why can't you just be like your older sister? You're
too sensitive. You're asking too many questions.
That's
Why
right.
do you always bring these things up?
Yep.
Why do you want to go serve in that way?
Yes.
Whatever.
Yep. Yeah. So you have deep wounds because people have told you that your greatest asset, your greatest gift, is actually a threat.
Yeah.
And it's a threat to the system. And we just need you to shut the F up.
Yeah. I think this chapter, I mean, I definitely have orphan wounding, but I just, like, every page is underlined of like, what? Wow. Wow. I think there's even expletives there are in my notes of like, WTF, how many effing times has this happened to me? So the beautiful thing that I think is, not that I haven't known and felt the stranger, but again, and either strangers become often estranged, which is what you led to, the stranger in the family or the stranger in the church often becomes estranged from the system that they couldn't play along with eventually. Right. And I think that for me, when I read this, there was so much kindness for myself that was awakened in my heart toward my own desire.
Yes.
Like, I think that because of how I grew up as a woman in the evangelical culture in the South, there was so much politeness, like, slathered on my desire.
Yep.
And I thought my desires were really bad because I was told they were bad,
right,
over and over and over again, that what I wanted was either impossible or what I wanted was just terrible. Like, how could you who do you think you are? Like, I can't tell you how many times the who do you think you are, came up as a narrative.
Absolutely.
So talk about stranger and the desires, that desire component to the stranger.
Some of the best, most delightful stories I've worked with are the freedom that a stranger can get when they recognize that they actually were prophets the whole time. And I think that allows a stranger to release themselves from that sense of I'm disruptive, I'm bad, I'm seeing too much, I'm asking too much, all of these kind of things that are placed on you are actually shifted to like, no, you are the truth teller. You are the one who is actually dreaming on behalf of your family in the most gospel centered way that was available, right? You actually have an imagination, and that sparks such deep desire, right? You're the one who wants the world to actually wake up. Wake up. But you're also, your heart is so alive, but when you're told to deaden it over and over again, you're in such a deep war.
Yeah.
Because you either deaden your desire and then belong.
Yeah. Right.
Or you get kicked out because it's too much and too big, and then you're alone.
Yeah.
And I think when a stranger starts to recognize, one, you know, they can be difficult. Like when you see everything and hear everything, you know, you're meant to be a prophet, but prophets have to be really careful around how they're actually speaking truth. It has to be in love and community. And it is easier to critique than it is to create.
Yeah.
And so prophets are always on that edge of like, I have to be involved, and I can't just pull the grenade and throw it in and then walk away. That's not actually a responsible use of your passion, of your desire. But then how does a prophet, a stranger, stay in the agony of their disappointment without turning on themselves or the rest of the world? And that's the thing that the stranger has to lean into. And so a stranger has to be so dedicated to like beauty and goodness and like passion and art and music, and you know, like that you have to be the one who is like remembering that the world is worth the agony, or else you will go into addiction, self-sabotage, you know, places of just a lot of darkness because it's too much to bear. So strangers, again, when strangers get released, oh my gosh, they're so powerful and so grateful that all the names that they've borne all these years aren't actually true.
Yeah. And envy is the other thread of that desire and that war with hope, and that war with like, do I create or do I numb? You know, do I keep hoping when I know it's going to cost me to speak out here, or do I move anyway toward it? And then sometimes when we move toward it, there is this intersection, I think, with envy. And because the attraction to beauty and a world reimagined is so like exciting, then when we do begin to create, the cost feels like, to be envied is to bear someone's complete hatred.
Absolutely. Yeah. Often with these things, especially as you grow more into priest, more into prophet, and then, you know, I don't know if we'll have time to get into it today, but into widow or into queen and king. When people see life and goodness, we do one of two things often. One, we want to consume it. Figure out how like to bring that into me. So like, you know, they see your life, your capacity to create. It's like, how do I jump on that to connect me to a life force that's outside myself? So you want to consume the energy. Now, when they realize you can't consume it, or you put up boundaries to say, I don't really want to be consumed, often they'll go to marring your beauty, marring your gifting, you know, and so you either want to consume it, you want to kill it.
Ooh. Yeah.
And
Oof.
Right. And that's where envy comes in both ways.
Both ways. That's the truth. If you've been envied, then you're also prone to envy.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's just no other way around it. Okay. I do want to move, because we've talked about orphan, we've talked about priest, we've talked about the stranger, and then the prophet. We're not going to have time, but let's to fully talk through prophet. But you've given us some guardrails here. You're just going to have to buy the book, people. Like, that's the bottom line, is you're going to need to just quickly go get this.
I would say if there's no other book that you read in 2022, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is the one you need to read.
Wow. Do it.
That is such a huge compliment.
No, I'm serious. I'm like, listen, Just
listen, all
listen.
these were alive.
Just listen for a minute. Last year, I made an effort to read more, because leaders need to read more.
Readers are
And
leaders.
so I bought a crap ton of books. Now ask me how many of those I've read in 2021. Not a damn one.
Oh, not one.
Not even one.
I was giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Because I found them on Audible, and it's an ongoing argument me and Emily have.
I'm cool. I don't have to argue.
Do you fully,
I
or
used to
have
not
you
like
read
it,
the
but-
book? If you've listened to the book, and I'm of the opinion that if you've listened to it, you've read it, and it's interchangeable or whatever.
It's fine.
I've brought her to the dark side, and that's great. But I'm reading this other thing called Atomic Habits. And it's like, just do things for 2 minutes. Just do things for 2 minutes. And then you keep going from there and build a habit. So my goal for this year is to read for 2 minutes, whatever.
That's great.
But my point in all of that is, if you're like me and you don't read anything, just read this book for 2 minutes a day. And it will, if you don't read anything else, and not kidding, it will change everything.
I think part of why it's so relevant is because, like you just mentioned, Cathy, a lot of these archetypes and a lot of these wounds were exposed in the pandemic and are still being exposed in what we're living out.
Yes.
And so if you find yourself kind of not being able to find your feet and to really ground into, like, how do I experience peace in the midst of what everything feels like it's been, a rug pulled out from under the world, you can see clear. This will help you put on some new glasses, I think.
Absolutely.
And start
Well, we have a wonderful opportunity. This is so painful, but all of our nerve endings are exposed right now. Like our old ways of being aren't working. There's no going back. We have new collective wounds. And so, and there is an opportunity in all of that where we're seeing more of our patterns play out live. And many of us are saying, well, gosh, I don't actually want to become an alcoholic. I don't actually want to live with anxiety every day. I don't actually want to, feel overloaded with my kids or get divorced. We're
work
kind of,
my fingers to the bone for a
Right.
company that's not rewarding me.
Absolutely.
I'm done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the numbers are staggering. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is one of those moments where the cement is wet.
Yeah.
And so what are you it'll dry again.
Right.
It'll dry. We're going to go to something, and then we're going to concretize it, and it's going to become a thing. But we're not there yet. And so in this moment, will you take this opportunity where we actually have a chance to reassess, to rethink where there's a neuroplasticity, I think, right now that we don't fully understand. And so you have a chance to actually become more healed, have a capacity to have more joy, more play, more delight, more capacity to grieve. All of that is actually possible right now, but we have to actually do the work.
Oh, so true. As the widow does her work, she is at this war with love. And talk about her losses. Because I think when I first read this, I thought, oh, it has to be a divorce, or it has to be a death of a spouse. And what you uncover in there is so much deeper and truer.
Yeah. I think the widow is has known something of goodness, of mutuality, of connection, and realizes that death is inevitable. And then the widow has to choose, will I love again and connect again, even though I now understand that loss will be there to some degree or another. Even what you're talking about with the board member, right? Like the idea that you've created something beautiful, you love it, and there will be loss and betrayal, and it will change. Nothing that you've created or loved on this earth will stay the same. And there will be either big deaths or little deaths in all of them. And the widow has experienced enough of that where she's like, I'm done. I'll isolate, I may participate, but you won't get to my heart. And I won't actually give myself in that way. And I think that's incredibly important to understand. And then her transition or his transition is then to king and queen, where you can you can move into that place where your job is to actually create and to risk and to hold the whole, and be able to bring flourishing to the kingdom through making difficult decisions, through bearing death, through bearing grief. But you're actually inviting everyone to kind of come back into an alignment that is met, but only if the widow decides that he or she can risk and love again, knowing that they can bear the loss. And so the capacity for rupture and repair, the idea that, the idea that we can move into loss and heartache, but then there's actually something on the other side of it, and that repair can take place, not necessarily everything going back to the way it was, but it can move further into what it could be in this next season.
And in some ways, do you feel, it seems like you were saying this, and I can't find it where I've got it, but that the queen or king holds kind of has tended to the spaces of the orphan and the stranger, and it's kind of this culmination role or of transformation. Do these stages, do we see these stages happening at different parts of our lives? Can we?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, it's not linear, and I think you can see different parts happen at different times. Like right now in my own career, I was, the past 17 years, I've been in that king queen role pretty heavily. And now I'm more into the priest prophet section because of shifts that have happened in my life. And so I think we can see our hearts kind of working out what's needed and also what's being overused, right? And so, for me, the queen kind of got overused after a while, and she needs a break to recover. And that priestly aspect of holding the story needs to kind of come back in. But that role of queen king is really the one that serves the role of the priest and the prophet, and allows there to be spaces and structures for them to do their work with the people, without the weight of needing to kind of do the yes and no decisions, the weight of the moments of where there's going to be heartache or difficult decisions being made. They need to be at the table, but the role of the king and queen is really the one who holds some of the most difficult spaces within organizations and within your own heart, where you have to land and make a call.
Yeah.
Is there one better than the other?
No, I don't think so. I love them all.
And real quick, I do have to ask this. Is it important to, for instance, if you're identifying with prophet, but you don't really identify with stranger, what's that gap about? Like if you're identifying,
it's like an 8-wing 3. It's impossible.
There's no such thing. So if you're identifying as like queen, this is how I function, but you read widow and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that just start with whatever you're identifying with.
Okay.
And just move into those spaces, take whatever is in front of you, and then just trust that the process will move you as you're meant to move. And that it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have talked your ear off. We could go so much longer, but I know fun. You have a meeting. We have a meeting too.
Yeah.
And we got lost. I got lost in the time. So I'm really, really grateful for your participation and for this beautiful work that you've offered the world. Thank you, Cathy.
Bye-bye.
Yes, you're so welcome. Thank you guys for having me. What a privilege.
Hope to connect with you soon. In Waco, maybe you can come to Texas again.
Would love it.
Okay.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Bye. All right, bye.